Welcome to LitCon. I get the pleasure of telling you some little administrative things. Like if you notice, on the back of your name tag is the Wi-Fi password, as well as a QR code that goes right to the agenda, and some cool stickers. The stickers are kind of blocking the QR code. You'll have to move them. But it is there, and Wi-Fi access and the agenda as well. I also get to say thank you. As Andy had noted, Hello Prenup, the product of a Suffolk alum, very generously donates money to help with offsetting some of the costs of this each year, particularly travel for some folks. I also wanted to acknowledge the folks from the AAA that are here, our trial and appeals court partners that are here. I wanted to thank Katie. I don't know if she's around, but she helped in the clinical programs, really helped with a lot of this, as well as Sandra, Allison, and events, Jenna, who helped set up all this video, Mike, who's taken pictures, Sam, Quentin, Bryce, and Rajaswari, our newest member of the Lit Lab, hired just, how long is it now, Rajaswari? A month ago, newest member of the lab. Let's welcome Rajaswari. Also, thank you to Diana Leary, Gabe Tenenbaum, who I see back there, Sarah Boonen, and of course, Andy. Now that we've got sort of the administrative, important acknowledgements as well out of the way, this is where I get to sort of set the tone. Usually I try to say something to make clear what the stakes are of the work we're doing today. And I actually had a really nice conversation with Tom Martin, who I think is somewhere in the audience a couple days ago, and he was asking questions about, what it is that gets me up in the morning. Where do I find purpose? And for those of you who don't know, I started my professional career as a high school physics and astronomy teacher, and then I switched over to law. And I like to joke that I switched from nature's laws to people's laws. And I often think about the similarity between those, and that they're both at their heart pursuit for the truth. But I think what I want to think about now is the difference between them, because when you're working with natural laws, nature is what nature is. And you're doing a descriptive project. We who work in people's laws get to work in an aspirational project. The laws we make are an attempt to codify the world we want to live in. And that's something that I think we all share in the legal profession as a commitment to that higher purpose, to that making of a better world through the law. And you know what? Come on. There we go. Good friend of ours, John Adams, did some, arguments just down the street. A quote often attributed to him, not quite exactly what he said, but we'll go with it anyway, is, "We are a country of laws, not men." Last year, I stood at this podium. Some wild things were going on. This year, wild things are still going on. I made an observation then, confined particularly to the rule of law, and recognizing that whenever I think that we have an ethical obligation as attorneys to help protect the rule of law, and that whenever a group of attorneys gets together and the rule of law is under threat, it is worth noting that. Otherwise, I feel we are derelict in our ethical obligations. So I just want to take a moment and say, things are not okay, but maybe we can make them better. So why do I get out of, and I think we all, the thing that's crazy is I can say such an anodyne thing and everyone knows exactly what I'm talking about. Anyhow, I get up every morning, usually because of my students. I love students. I've had students when I taught physics. I've had students when I teach here. I also get up because of the impact that the students have on people's lives out in the world. But today I got up because of you, because of this community, because this is a community that's dedicated to making a difference, even if only in some small corner of the world. And so people are always telling, how do you choose your life? Chase your curiosity, chase your dreams, chase your passion. I say, do work you're proud of. And that's the perfect segue for me to say that today we're going to get to showcase a lot of work that a lot of people can be proud of. And in a moment, well, I'll just bring it up for Quentin. where he's going to talk about a lot of things that a lot of people should be proud of. Nope.
Actually, if I could have the guest in the room here, Jonathan Kyle, I could have you come up if you're willing to be recognized now. Stand up next to me. So I think almost everybody here in the room knows Jonathan Pyle, who is, of course, the creator of the Docassemble platform. I'm going to just make sure everybody else can see what I'm saying, though. Do a screen share here. Let's share this one. Great. So I was looking, I realized I really like to have kind of a digital artifact here to help us remember, but I don't know if any of you know that this is the 10th anniversary of the creation of Docassemble. So 10 years ago today, Jonathan here created this wonderful technology that's now used by people literally all over the world. I pulled up from archive.org this old image of the website. You can see what it looks like now, a little bit more clean and user-friendly in appearance. Jonathan tells me maybe they just didn't catch the image. I was not there at the very beginning of Docassemble, but I was an early adopter. I found this blog post that I wrote, I guess about a year after it was launched, when I was trying to choose the right platform for a tool that I was creating called Massachusetts Defense for Eviction. And I looked at all the things that were out there, and I found this wonderful website that Jonathan created talking about this great tool. And I decided from then on to become Docassemble's evangelist-in-chief, a self-appointed title. Because Jonathan's not so good at talking up himself. He likes to be in the background, just working away. One of the places that he does that is on the Docassemble Slack, which has, as of today, more than 2,000 people from, again, all over the world who come here and ask questions of Jonathan in every time zone, any time of day. They might be asking something. And usually within a few hours, even if it's somebody asking in Riyadh or in Adelaide, there's going to be an answer there for whatever problem is puzzling them, or even a very basic feature that maybe they could have found if they looked at the documentation. Sometimes that's me.
And they ask their question by writing it in their native language and then putting it through Google Translate. And so I'm reading this stuff and I'm like, what are you trying to ask?
From that beginning 10 years ago, I'll just highlight a couple of things here. It became the building block of some commercial tools, including Tama Officer here is one of the founders of one of those companies, After Pattern, that was built on that foundation of Docassemble. Gavel, which is another product, again, built on top of Docassemble. Because not only, and as well as Hello Divorce, which got major investments from the founder of Clio. And all these tools were able to be built because not only did Jonathan release this for free to those in the nonprofit space, but also commercial products were able to be built on top of it, which again has really helped, I think, spur its adoption and shows his real commitment to this cause. Of course, especially excited about all the great nonprofit solutions. And not only did it build those commercial companies, but it was the foundation of Upsolve, which has now resolved, I think, over $1 billion of debt around the country. Michigan Legal Help, Illinois Legal Help, Law Help Minnesota, many other legal aid programs around the country are moving their nonprofit DIY forms over to the Docassemble platform as well. We've been helping them here at Suffolk, where it was the foundation of our Court Forms Online project, which during the pandemic helped serve. Now at this point, we help more than, what was the number we agreed was the right one to say? About 30,000 people a year visit our tools just here in Massachusetts. All thanks to your work, Jonathan. And really, I don't know if you get to see or feel all of the benefit that your tool has created, but it truly is there. For all of those reasons, and the fact that I think you really are not often sung as much as you should be, I want to present you with this award here today, recognizing your 10 years of service. might have now in your hands. One of the things you might have noticed that's been consistent here is that cat logo. I think you guys have a cat. This is the basis of this, right? Thank you.
I did at the time. It was actually my neighbor's cat who climbed in through the window, but yeah, that's the basis of the logo.
So I'd like you to, if you would, put on the cat ears that you have on your table now to celebrate Jonathan too. And you can keep on as long as you'd like. But hopefully it adds a little fun to the day too. Thank you. So I just get to do the fun things here today, right? This is what it turns out. My next fun job here is to present, to introduce our really great students. So we have here working with us, not just the staff at this table, but also a wonderful cohort every year of, this year, 12 different students who are part of our clinical programs. So we have 2 fellows who are embedded in our clinic, but also have a home clinic. So those students represent the online dispute resolution clinic, as well as the Human Rights and Indigenous Peoples Clinic. And we have 10 students who are participating only in our clinic and doing just innovation work for partners all around the country. This year, they've responded to a wide range of different urgent needs, and David gave that framing, right? But we're here thinking about what is it that we can do? If we're the helpers, what can we do to help heal the broken world, to help make it easier for pro se people to access relief, to help respond to cuts in programs like Medicaid, to borders closing. So our students this year are responding to issues such as those cuts to Medicaid by helping people with Medicaid appeals, dealing with immigration, guardianship for vulnerable adults, working to help people turn their confusing stories when they went to a trial and weren't able to figure out everything, to help turn that into a coherent appellate appeal. Working on responding to debt collection cases, helping people who literally cannot afford to be divorced because it's too expensive in this country, and people go years and years with that barrier of a marriage that stops them from being able to move on when they've moved on emotionally and in other ways, as well as abuse prevention for vulnerable Indigenous communities, the Mashpee tribe. So with that said, I'm going to let them tell you more about their projects, and they're also going to tell you a little bit about what it's like to work in the lab. And we're going to start with Elizabeth Claggett, who's going to talk about her project, and then the rest of the students are going to introduce themselves.
I'm going to hop in because we've got an inception thing going on with Zoom because the presenter was in presenter by side. So
you were saying, okay.
There we go. Okay, well, by sharing that, it was sharing that as the thing, and then it had this as well. So it was like, it is, you can see it now. All right. And then I also, let me just really quickly. So did you guys already change the slide deck? Did you already change the slide deck? Did you already change the slide deck? I don't see. Maybe you never will. All right.
No, I think
Is this one?
is that where he's
I can bring them back. All right, here we go. All right, last minute changes, always fun. All right, and for some reason the
to use the keyboard arrows.
All right, thank you for your patience.
Imagine a Mass Health member named Maria. She's been prescribed insulin for several years to manage her diabetes and remains stable with consistent use. When she goes to refill her prescription, Maria learns that Mass Health will no longer cover her insulin. She confirms with her doctor that this specific insulin is still medically necessary, and although Mass Health suggested an alternative, Maria has already tried that medication in the past and it did not effectively control her blood sugar levels and caused side effects. Shortly after, she receives a formal denial notice explaining that she has 60 days to appeal the decision. Without coverage, Maria cannot afford the medication, making insurance her only option to maintain her necessary treatment. She searches online and finds the Mass Health Fair Hearing Request form, but instead of a straightforward process, she encounters a complex legalistic form with confusing questions that carry real financial and coverage consequences. The form must be completed within the deadline, or she risks losing her right to appeal the decision. Maria's story is just one example of a Mass Health member navigating this process. Despite important differences in individual circumstances, everyone is required to complete the same generic form with broad instructions and significant consequences. More broadly, this issue extends beyond Mass Health and across many areas of law. Individuals are often required to complete complex legal forms under tight deadlines without clear explanations of what is required or the consequences of their responses. This is where the Legal Innovation and Technology Clinic comes in. The clinic focuses on making legal processes more accessible by designing tools that better support users navigating these systems. Using Docassemble, we design user-friendly guided interviews that collect the information needed to complete legal documents, ultimately producing a finished, ready-to-submit form for the user. For example, take this question on the Mass Health Fair Hearing Request form. To start, the title, Other Information, doesn't help the user understand what they're being asked. The directions are also confusing because the form says to check all that apply, but the first two options are actually opposites, so the user is only supposed to choose one. And importantly, those options only make sense if the person is already receiving benefits. If their appeal is about eligibility, those choices don't apply. Similarly, the third option only applies if the user is appealing their eligibility. So before we ask the user to select any of these options, we should ask them, is this appeal about your Mass Health eligibility? If the user answers no, that this appeal is not about their eligibility, the next question clearly explains the two benefit options in plain English and requires the user to select just one, either keeping their current benefits during the appeal and risking repayment if they lose, or accepting reduced benefits during the appeal with no risk of having to pay anything back to Mass Health. If the user answers yes, that their appeal is about eligibility, the interview skips the benefits question entirely because it doesn't apply to them and instead addresses the third option regarding pre-hearing resolution. At this point, the user and you may be wondering, what is a pre-hearing resolution? This option lacks key information. The details the user needs are on the next page of the form, buried among an overwhelming amount of other important information. So the user must search for the information and decide whether it is the right option for their situation. This takes extra time for the user and increases the likelihood of confusion and frustration. Now instead, if the user answers yes, that their appeal is about eligibility, the next question greets them with information about what a PHR is, what happens if they select this option, and some examples of eligibility issues that can be resolved through PHR. This is part of a process called design thinking, an approach we use across all of our projects that keeps the end user at the center of our work. Design thinking is an iterative, user-centered process that focuses on understanding how people experience these systems, identifying where confusion or difficulty arises, and refining solutions over time through multiple drafts of the tool. Through this approach, we can redesign legal forms as guided processes that simplify complex information and make it more accessible to people like Maria. Ultimately, this work is not just about improving forms. It is about improving how people access and navigate important decisions about their legal rights. By reducing unnecessary complexity and supporting more informed decision-making, we can make these processes more accessible to everyone. I will now pass it off to Jackie, and she will discuss design thinking in more detail and her and Derek's project.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Derek and I spent this semester working on a Docassemble interview for adult guardianship. Adult guardianship is a legal relationship in which a court appoints someone to make decisions for an adult who lacks capacity to manage certain aspects of their life, often involving healthcare, finances, or living arrangements. Because it involves a significant loss of autonomy, courts require ongoing oversight to ensure it remains necessary and appropriately limited. After consulting subject matter experts, we focused on one key aspect of this system, the Guardian's Care Plan Report. This is a court-required annual filing where the guardian must demonstrate that they are fulfilling their duties, report any changes in the adult's condition or circumstances, and justify the continued need for guardianship. And this year, the court rolled out an entirely new form. Legally, this form ensures continued court supervision, helps prevent abuse or misuse of authority, and reinforces that guardianship should be as limited and temporary as possible. At the same time, it places a significant burden on guardians who must compile legal, medical, and personal information accurately. Our project is a strong example of where design thinking applies because this process is often confusing and overwhelming. The form requires multiple types of information at once, and mistakes or omissions can have serious legal consequences. As Elizabeth mentioned, design thinking is a human-centered approach to problem solving. It emphasizes empathy, creativity, and iteration. Instead of starting with rules or system, it starts with people, understanding their experiences and needs and building solutions around them. That approach is especially important in adult guardianship. While the system is meant to protect vulnerable individuals, it can feel inaccessible and disempowering in practice. So what happens if we rethink guardianship through a design thinking lens? The first step is empathy. In this system, there are multiple stakeholders: the adult under guardianship, the guardian, the family members, and the court. Each experiences the system differently. For example, a guardian may struggle with reporting requirements or deadlines. Court forms may be difficult to complete without legal training. And most importantly, the adult under guardianship may feel like decisions are being made about them rather than with them. This reflects the core principle of the disability rights movement, nothing about us without us, which emphasizes that individuals should be included in decisions that affect their lives. In the guardianship context, it highlights the importance of preserving autonomy and ensuring that the adult's voice remains central even within the legal framework. Focusing on empathy allows us to see guardianship not just as a legal structure, but as a lived experience. From there, we define the problem. The issue is not simply paperwork or oversight, it's that the system is not designed with its users in mind. It can be difficult to navigate, understand, and adopt the individual at its center. In other words, the system works, but is not always in a way that is accessible or empowering for the individual. The next stage is ideation. This is where we ask, how can we make the system more intuitive and accessible? One example is simplifying language. We consulted various attorneys and other professionals in the field to better grasp what type of language makes the most sense to users. The annual recertification form uses terms like excellent, good, fair, and poor to describe conditions and services. But these categories are vague and often difficult to apply. What exactly do they mean? And how can individuals be expected to adequately simplify these crucial decisions and services? We work to clarify these standards in plain language so users better understand what is being asked of them. The next step is prototyping. Using Docassemble, we created an interactive interview that guides users through the care plan report step by step. Instead of presenting one long, overwhelming form, the process is broken into clear and manageable questions with built-in explanations. This allows users to better understand what is being asked and reduces the likelihood of errors. Finally, testing allows us to evaluate whether the solution actually works for its intended users. By sharing the interview with classmates during clinic meetings and incorporating feedback with our subject matter experts, we were able to identify areas of confusion and correct errors. This iterative process ensures that the tool is functional, accessible, and user-friendly. I'm now going to hand it off to Derek to discuss the tools we learned and used in more depth.
I'll be speaking about some of the toolkit we have access to and the learning arc of the students this year as the participation in the clinic. This includes the Weaver, which is a developed automated system to help introduce the skeletal framework for the coding side of Docassemble, which you've received a cursory introduction to, and is based in the Python coding language. And there are a few other things I'd like to touch on. The Weaver was developed here at Suffolk. It goes ahead and it converts the form directly uploaded and then will introduce the preliminary coding framework. This includes what fields are being addressed in a given frame of the interview. This can also apply certain types of logic intuitively, whether that be mutually exclusive radio buttons or select all or mandatory fields. Finally, the output, in this case, you can see on the far right, is one such example of the code that you can see present on the third image here. It's a very powerful tool. It allows students and developers to hit the ground running, to avoid the first arduous task of the preliminary code that's involved, maybe 500 to 1,000 lines, and that's done for them. And that allows them then to go ahead and add their bespoke, custom, and their design thinking elements into each given frame of the interview. Some features that are really important to Docassemble, and we'll touch on a few of them that I think are exceptionally powerful when it pertains to the practice of law and for pro se individuals looking to resolve their legal issues. First and foremost, introductory panels can be used to ask questions simply to determine eligibility. It can be a tremendous frustration for people who are under stress or dealing with time-sensitive issues such as eviction or rent increases or other such problems. And we want to make sure that they're at the right form and that they're not spending their limited time and their limited energy on forms that are not pertinent to them. Another feature, which was touched upon briefly by Elizabeth, are some built-in logic questions. Two I'd like to talk about are mandatory and skipping logics. Unfortunately, courts can be very, or in agencies as well, can be very strict on their forms. And if you're missing just one field, one option, one checkbox, results in return to sender. Normally, that's simply a mild frustration, but with critical legal issues and disputes, the user can run out of time. And that's really troubling for certain specific issues. Another one is the skipping logic. Oftentimes, forms will have if yes or if no, further explain, or skip to box 13. That can give forms an overwhelming sense. A form that might be 3, 5, 7 pages long for a given individual might only have 5, 10, or 15 relevant field entries depending on their situation. And so this really does help speed up and make those forms seem a little less daunting. Here's somewhere some design thinking when it comes to legal elements is really interesting. I have two examples here of embedded tips and guidance. One is the mouse over green drop-down menu. When a user mouses over, it can give a cursory explanation. This is actually just the explanation of the explanation here. And then finally, we have a mouse over directly to the choice that's selected. In this case, I'm using the definition of mental health services under excellent. You would mouse over and it would give you the definition, whether that's provided by the state, by legal experts at a legal aid clinic, to really help that user understand in simple English or another kind of facet that they might not be unaware of. And it's great because there are terms, for example, we have a nexus in adult guardianship between the law and medical and financial. In this case, what's the definition of incapacitated? What does that really mean? Or I see there's an option here for save account. What is that? What is a fiduciary? And this helps dispel some ambiguity. And a couple other really key points is some of these selections will trigger action from the court, action from an agency that maybe, for in our case, might dispel the guardianship or might cause further on action or the requirement certification of a medical officer. And then finally, we're able to show how the law changes and how the law iterates, and our interviews can keep up with that, and we can keep changing the relevant guidance. Finally, we have finishing touches in Docassemble from a legal perspective. So one such thing is integrated logic for the given jurisdiction. In Massachusetts, this goes by county. The various court systems, and if I'm using the example of probate and family court, are on the county level. And so there could be a nuance there, and that you would not be aware of. It's very easy in a smaller state like Massachusetts, where there is some variety, but you wouldn't know. And then we also have the ability to provide a follow-on instructions page that's attached to their filled out form when the user goes to complete. And this includes relevant deadlines, additional supporting documents that you may have to attach to that filled out form. And one of my favorites is giving the contact information, hours of operation for relevant legal aid, and make that a really one-stop shop for the user. And finally, with a Suffolk Lit Lab kind of developed a little bit with Docassemble, is that you can integrate, would you like reminder texts and emails? So for example, in rent or tenant disputes, there are certain time horizons, such as a week after notice, where it might be pertinent to withhold rent in lieu of something wrong with the home, for example. And so that keeps people informed, hey, has your landlord rectified this situation? If not, you're entitled to X, Y, and Z action or remedy. And so looking into the future, Docassemble allows creative solutions, whatever your field of law might be and whatever target demographic you're looking to assist. The Weaver tremendously helped introduce students to Docassemble and its Python learning language in a way that was approachable and familiar. Any type of solution developed by one of my colleagues or myself can then be readily taken up with a simple copy and paste of the relevant code, which is tremendous. And finally, we have some integrations for e-filing. And I'll speak a little bit just here because my colleague unfortunately cannot make it today. But this is open source. We can take our code, we can push it to a software website. Some of you are familiar with GitHub, and that can be accessible. And that's tremendous because the assembly, Lego building block type of solutions that we can develop on any given form or any given legal dispute can then be more widely accessed by other students or other schools and can be further iterated upon for future practitioners in future clinics when our cohort moves on. So I'm going to go ahead and give you to my next two colleagues over here. Thank you very much.
And I'm going to tell the folks who had to take chairs off, there are empty seats up in the front table.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Gabriella Brown. I'm a Lit Fellow. I'm also in the Human Rights and Indigenous Peoples Clinic. So imagine someone who's being harassed by a neighbor or someone other than a family member. At first, it's small, unwanted interactions or showing up more often than they should. Over time, this behavior escalates. It becomes more frequent, intrusive, and harder to ignore. Now, this person no longer feels safe in their own space. They realize they need legal protection, but now they need to figure out how to get it. They may not have the time or feel comfortable going to the courthouse. They may have questions if what they're experiencing qualifies for protection. The legal system no longer feels like a solution, but another barrier. When someone already feels vulnerable, this process is confusing and intimidating. This project is different from the others because we're not just building a tool for a user, but developing the legal framework with the tribal court at the same time. My role here is unique. Through my work in the Human Rights and Indigenous Peoples Clinic, working directly with members of the tribal court and tribal police on drafting the law itself. At the same time, as a Lit Fellow, I'm also helping build the tools that'll support that process. This project sits at the intersection of developing the legal framework and translating it into something users can navigate. We're working within a tribal court system, so there's unique jurisdictional and procedural considerations compared to state courts. Tribal governments are separate sovereigns, so they create and enforce their own laws and court processes. In this context, jurisdiction can depend on who is the individual and where the conduct took place. So there's both a legal complexity and a real access barrier for the user, especially for people who may not be familiar with the tribal court system and how that works. Sorry. As the tribe continues to refine their legal systems, there's an opportunity to think about how this process should work for people using it. That means we're able to think about the law, the process, and user experience together. And as student attorneys, that has required us to center the user from the beginning and present information in a way that's clear, accessible, and trauma-informed. Once we've done this, the next step is actually building something usable. And my partner Peter will talk more about how that looks in practice. Thank you.
Right, so building off that, the goal is to take that legal framework and turn it into something that users can actually navigate in a clear and structured way. So instead of presenting someone with a long static form, the tool walks them through the process step by step, asking questions in a logical order, and only showing what's relevant based on the situation. That way the experience feels more like a guided conversation rather than trying to interpret legal language. A big focus has been taking something that is legally complex and breaking it down into more manageable pieces. For example, there are complex jurisdictional issues that come up with a case in tribal court. It isn't the person's job to answer those questions directly or even know the rules, but we can explain the issue and guide them through answering questions like where they live, where the defendant lives, and where the events took place, which will allow the court to make that decision. So rather than expecting the user to understand everything up front, the tool helps them build their answers gradually, which reduces confusion and makes it less likely that they'll make mistakes or leave out important information. It also allows us to build in structure and consistency, so the information that's submitted is clearer, not just for the user, but also for the court reviewing it. The idea is that someone who's eligible to seek a protection order can go through this process on their own terms without needing to fully understand the legal system or rely on outside assistance. And at the same time, the tool helps ensure that the information being submitted is more complete and usable, which benefits both the user and the court. So it's not just about making things easier, it's about making the process more reliable and more accessible at the same time. And while our project involves building alongside a system that's still evolving, other teams are working with courts that already have established processes and are focused on improving how those systems function in practice.
Hi, everyone. So the Lit Clinic has had a great working relationship with the Massachusetts Appeals Court, and I've had the opportunity to work with them over this past year on a few different forms. So for our most recent work together, the Appeals Court had a problem because they had an upcoming deadline regarding accessibility of their online forms, and when they were thinking about the civil and criminal docketing statements, they thought of the Lit Clinic to help make a guided. Yeah, can you hear me? Okay, cool. They thought of the Lit Clinic to help make a guided interview as a solution to this problem. So just some background, a docketing statement provides background on the case like party information, issues, and procedural history, and an appellant will fill that out at the beginning of their appeals process. And it really helps the court quickly understand the case and manage it efficiently. So throughout creating the interview, I was lucky enough to have a great collaborative relationship with the appeals court. Instead of working for them, we were really working with them. We would meet with them, share drafts, and incorporate feedback as we built the forms. And during these meetings, the appeals court were thinking about the people who would actually be using the forms, what will give the most accurate outputs, and how this actually affects their own work. And that partnership leads to a better final product because the people who actually administer and use the forms are involved in the design process. So I just want to say thank you to the appeals court for being such a great partner throughout the year. It's made my experience really enjoyable. So when it came to the civil and criminal docketing statements, we needed to make them digitally accessible. The digital accessibility is governed by WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which are international standards set for online accessibility. And they set rules for making online content usable for people with disabilities. So, for example, someone who is blind might rely on a screen reader to navigate a form. If a form is not structured correctly, the screen reader may not be able to interpret it properly, making it difficult or impossible to complete the form. So Docassemble's features allow forms to be screen reader compliant. They can have the correct color contrast, provide descriptive links, and alternative text to photos. We also make sure that our questions are not asked in confusing legal jargon, and we rewrite and reformat the order of questions to make them easier to understand for the user. So here's an example of a PDF that has columns, and this actually poses accessibility issues when using a screen reader because the screen reader will move from left to right. So it may read the title of the first column, then the title of the second column, and then go back and ask questions under the first column. So Docassemble fixes this by giving the user full questions in a logical context so that the screen reader can read the full explanation and then the user can answer that question. It also allows the user to answer questions before moving on to the next one. And Docassemble does not rely on visual context the same way that PDFs do because it asks the users questions based on answers to their previous questions or the logical order that we set. So accessibility is especially important in the court system where many users are self-represented litigants. If a form is confusing or inaccessible, it can become a barrier to participating in the legal process. And ultimately, the goal of this work is to make it easier for people to interact with the court system. By improving accessibility and clarity, the appeals court is helping ensure that more people can meaningfully participate in the appeals process. But not only does the form help individuals facing the justice system, it also benefits the court itself. And I'll pass it off to Mark, who will discuss more in depth the multiple purposes of our work.
Well, thank you, Kat. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Murata, and I worked on the small claims interview. Oh, sorry. So naturally, the first question, thank you. First question when working on this project was, who is this for? Naturally, so it was just pro se litigants and the small claims court. So on the one side with the court, they're looking for an interview that's internally consistent, efficient to process, and procedurally correct. And this is also the first time I worked with the court system, and something that kind of struck me was how constructive and really practical they were with their feedback about what actually helps their staff move a case forward. And I feel like that focus then became an anchor throughout the rest of the iteration process. And then on the other end are the pro se litigants. These are people who hopefully and likely are not familiar with the process and need to be guided step by step. And that means translating legalese into plain language and also developing screens and constructing the screens that guides the user to the information they want and need. So this is basically the interview. This is the paper version of the court's small claim form. As you can see, it's a big box, large text box, minimal guidance. But now, users are given plain language details that kind of helps them guide and submit a more complete answer, helping both the court process the claim and the pro se litigant submit a more robust claim. So the small claims court exists at a very specific intersection. It's where the legal system meets everyday financial reality. So on the judicial economy side, Every correctly filed form is a case that doesn't get rejected. So good design in this context reduces friction for both the court and the litigant simultaneously. So these are aligned goals and not necessarily competing ones. The real economy piece is this. These claims aren't abstract, academic, legal exercises. It's real money that affects everyday lives. And that's what makes access to justice here a resource question. An interview that is too confusing to complete is a barrier that disproportionately affects the people this court was designed to serve. Then Docassemble lets you build towards both at once. A guided interview can enforce procedural completeness on the back end while presenting an approachable experience on the front end. So it's not just about equity, it's also about efficiency. So iteration worked in two parts for me. I first began working on this form in the summer of 2024 with the Lit Lab. I was learning Docassemble, it was my first experience. So I'm learning Docassemble, learning the tool while trying to build a court-ready form. This really forced a practical relationship, focusing strictly on what the form needed. Then in 2025, I came back to this interview with the clinic. Now it was about editing rather than building, and this was a different process altogether. So it required me to both interrogate my own form and somebody else's to see whether they still hold. However, the fundamental principles stayed constant across both phases. The focus remained on usability for the pro se litigant and efficiency for the court. I found that an underappreciated insight in legal technology is that courts are end users too. A lot of design thinking focuses on the litigants, but the court's sitting on the other end, and they have needs, workflows, and constraints that shape what good design actually looks like. Working directly with the court on this project made that real for me, and in no way a classroom could replicate. This experience has also been eye-opening as to what legal technology can do, not necessarily as a replacement, but as a way to make legal expertise more equitable and more efficient. Then, lastly, the law changes and the people filing keep us abreast about what we got wrong. That's not necessarily a flaw, but rather the point, that these tools are living documents and maintaining them is in its own form a form of legal practice. I'm going to pass it off to Connor, who's going to fill you guys in about the military affidavit.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark. So my name is Connor McGarry, and my project was the Military Affidavits project. First of all, why military affidavits? What are they? Well, a while ago, around 2003, there was a bill on Capitol Hill, and eventually that bill was signed by the president, became a law, the Service Members Civil Relief Act, SCRA for short. I'm going to continue to call it that for the rest of the presentation. And this bill does a lot of really, really cool things. And if you're in the military or you have family or friends in the military, I recommend you look more into this law. But what we care about for my project is that this bill postpones or suspends pending trials, lease terminations, and housing evictions for people that are in service. And now, why does this matter? Well, there's some pretty practical problems with serving people their legal papers if they're, parachuting in World War II or perhaps deployed in a submarine. But in addition to this, these people have the right to answer these civil suits. And due to the logistical concerns, they practically cannot while they're in service. And I demonstrated here, this is a really old problem. There were similar bills passed around the Civil War, World War I, World War II, with the most modern bill being passed in 2003, and with constant iterations and changes to it, because it's a very complex problem. The trial court has came up with this solution. We have two forms here, the military affidavit and the summary process one on the right. Basically, what these forms do is they put the burden on the plaintiff in these civil actions to go out, do the research, find out whether or not these people are in service, and then tell the court. Not only tell the court, but prove to the court and explain to the court how they know. And we can improve on this solution using Docassemble to create guided interviews, which for all the amazing reasons you already heard today, these guided interviews do improve outcomes. And I like to think that not only are we helping the court by helping the pro se litigants get better forms, but I like to think that this project is also helping the veterans by improving the likelihood that these forms are filled out correctly. And as a fun note, we were allowed to use AI for our developments this year, and my personal choice was Claude, and I'll speak more on that later. But just to highlight a couple of things in my project, there are actually two forms, but one guided interview. So how do we handle that? Because not everyone is going to need both forms. What we do here is we use conditional logic. So we can screen out pretty early on in the interview to find out what forms the user needs. We can ask them questions specific to that form. So we can save the user time, and we can make sure they're not asked any unnecessary confusing questions. This form also does a little bit of math for people, which not only could catch potential errors, but could remove a pain point for a lot of users. And this form is also, like the rest of these guided interviews, very modular. When I built this guided interview, I also built infrastructure that can be used for other interviews. Military affidavits are used in a lot of different civil actions. I believe there are around 129,000 electronically filed last year. And so the fact that we can reuse this infrastructure is really cool. And this was a really exciting time to be able to use generative AI in my workflow. On the left is kind of my own. I was jogging along. I was learning how to code. I was learning how to use these tools. But on the right is AI sprinting ahead of me. In the last 9 months, AI has really had amazing breakthroughs. And even 9 months ago, it could not do the type of work that it can do today. And I was able to, I feel, find an intersection, my own understanding with code and AI, and get some quality work done with it. Not to say there weren't some pitfalls. Sometimes AI does things you don't really want it to do. But the reason I chose the pitfall video game there is that if you're careful, you document the changes you make, and you save your code. Falling into a pit, making a mistake, is not a big deal. You just load your last save, think about what you did, and move on from there. And my own personal way I like to think about using AI is the funnel method. You want to give it as much context as you can, and give it as specific as a task as possible. Because again, as Professor Caluso says, it is kind of spicy autocorrect, and it's not some magical tool. So you really have to guide it and help it do what you want it to do. And next up, we have the 1A divorce team with Alari leading it out. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alara. I am with the 1A divorce team. There are 3 of us. Our work spans 2 clinics, so we're in the Lit Lab and we're in ODR. So what we're working on is a complete uncontested divorce package. Each of us are working on a separate guided interview. I will be telling you about the separation agreement guided interview I worked on, and then my teammates will delve into how they came up with the guided interviews for the joint petition and the financial statement. So the deal is, and I've worked with the court for a few years, there are a lot of people seeking an uncontested divorce, and they are pro se, so that could be for a few reasons. That could either be because they can't afford an attorney at that time, or because they just want to keep it simple. They want to leave lawyers out of it, and they're in agreement. So, but they're not getting approved. So my experience was a lot of people were maybe finding like Google templates. They were submitting those, they weren't getting approved, or they just weren't super sure on how the law works, so it still needed tweaking. So I think a lot of other people from the presentations touched up on this, but we have to think about the pain points from the perspective of the litigants and from the perspective of the court. So from the perspective of the litigants, they're pro se, right? They don't have counsel, they might not know the law. And then from the perspective of the court, they're getting a high volume of these agreements that they have to read through, and they're not really looking uniform in terms of structure. So with that being said, I looked at what was available on the mass.gov website, and there is a sample separation agreement template. The probate and family court prepared this. The judges helped prepare this. And my goal right now is to use Docassemble to translate this template into a series of questions that will fill it out on its own at the end. So instead of being met with this 16-page agreement that they would have to fill out in a particular order, my guided interview kind of starts with the easy question. So what's your name? Do you have kids? And it builds off from there. So David touched on this earlier too. We're not necessarily here to learn how to code. We're here to identify pain points and make the court system and justice more accessible to everybody. So moving forward, my goal is to just make whatever provisions are on this template into questions that are as simple and easy to understand as possible. And I am working on taking info off mass.gov and making it kind of an interactive informational platform. So as you are filling out your divorce agreement, you can also learn about how to go about it. So I'll pass the rest on to my teammate KP, and they will tell you about the joint petition.
All right. So as Alara noted, in a joint divorce, parties agree they want a divorce. They really just need help coming to a full agreement on the issues or completing their paperwork. So our project is a collaboration, and it's a collaborative effort involving the trial courts, specifically the Probate and Family Court, and the American Arbitration Association, our clinic, the Lit Clinic, as well as the ODR Innovation Clinic. As mentioned a couple times earlier, we have fellows in the Lit Clinic. So just like Gabby, I'm a Lit fellow. That means I split my time between the Online Dispute Resolution Innovation Clinic and the Lit Clinic. So between those two clinics, I was able to apply lessons learned from each while working in the other. So the roles that our various collaborators play, the courts are really our client, providing vision, guidance, and ultimate approval of the tool. The ODR clinic, providing fellows, someone like myself, as well as giving us some user testing with some informed law student users and general advice from the students and faculty there. AAA and Portable. Portable is a company that falls under the AAA umbrella. Their focus is really on online dispute resolution and getting parties to an agreement. We're collaborating with them, and our focus is on creating the guided interviews that populate the court forms and ultimately lead towards e-filing. So as many of my colleagues have discussed, AI has begun to change the way people work. It's poised to significantly change workflows across industries. Based on my experience using AI tools to help me learn to code and to build my portion of this divorce project, I'm really excited most about AI's potential to support human learning. So being the human in the loop, it may be the first time you've heard the first phrase today, but I can almost guarantee it won't be the last, right? But what does it mean to really be the human in the loop? AI is a tool. It's not a replacement for us. So to borrow Mark Lauritsen's metaphor, think of it like a exoskeleton, a digital exoskeleton, which can augment somebody's abilities, but the person ultimately has to decide how to direct the tool. Which brings us to my graphic roadmap for being the human in the loop. In this case, while using AI tools to build a guided interview, apologies. Or building a guided interview project where the human's legal knowledge significantly outpaces the human's coding abilities. So we start with a bug, an error message. I then used AI to diagnose the problem and it suggests solutions. For example, a syntax error, say I put in a capitalized letter where it should be lowercase, that will break the whole thing. And so I could use an AI bot to spot a capital letter where it shouldn't be, and it's much more effective at that than I could ever be. Finally, the light bulb. I made sure that I was implementing the coding changes, which was my way of maintaining control over the code. Then I would run tests, and then the cycle restarts as you find more bugs and continue. So the ultimate takeaway for me, an effective AI metaphor for this project was AI as a tutor, or maybe a TA. It's a virtual on-demand teaching assistant. The TA metaphor works because it's playing the AI is playing a facilitative role. I'm workshopping ideas, I'm experimenting, but ultimately I'm in control and I'm learning from the experience. Why it's like a TA? It's not static, it's conversational, right? It can adapt to me, it can meet me where I am, but ultimately I can't trust it to the edge of the earth, right? I need to make decisions for myself and take control of my own learning. Ultimately, I'm in control of my own approach and my own purpose for using the tools. I was able to learn from the AI suggestions and increase my capacity to learn from the tool and effectively be the human in the loop. And my capacity to do so increased as time went on. So just note that AI could help, but it certainly can't replace things like meeting with peers or asking for help from clinical faculty. And so to pass it on to one last member of our team who's joining us remotely, here's Sam.
Hi. Great job, KP and team, Alara and everybody. Wish I could be joining you all. I know we're talking about legal innovation and technology, but I'm in San Francisco right now, and these cars drive themselves, so definitely a huge range. But what I wanted to talk a little bit about and start us off with, I know you've seen many forms today, but one that I had the pleasure of working on this year alongside the 1A divorce team were these Massachusetts financial forms. And so uh, while a part of these this 1A divorce package, this is also a form that comes up very often in a number of other settings. And so you can kind of see the complexity here at 250 fields for the long form, which triggered over $75,000 in income. And then other forms that may trigger, if you're self-employed, there's now a Schedule A. If you have rental income, a Schedule B. The paper form and the digital form asks that you convert these numbers into weekly amounts. Not everybody thinks about their income or expenses in that way. And so this is just one of many forms, one of over 200 forms in the probate and family court alone. And according to Suffolk's Form Explorer, there's maybe over 700 of these forms in the full trial court system. And so if you could move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah. So what I did during this school year was build out a bit of a court form automation system for myself. So this financial statement wasn't the first form. And so by the time I had gotten to it, I had a bit of a system. So in walking you through what that looks like, you can upload a PDF or a docx, and then using large language models and their ability to go through information, extract basically every field in there. So the field names, the field types, what each box is asking you for to give you that inventory. So rather than maybe starting with the form and saying, hey, write me an interview, it helps to kind of do things in sequence. And so for those of you who may not know, I do have a bit of a background in software and product development, but this was my first time working with this tech stack for sure. And so what was nice about the Lit Labs GitHub is that they've got 256 open source repositories, including a lot of the forms that us students made, but also the full-time team and volunteers who've been working on a lot of these forms. And so I had the LLMs go through the ones submitted by Professor Colarusso, Professor Stainhouse, Sam Glover, Bryce Wiley, treating them as somewhat of like the golden standard for structural patterns that ought to be repeated across forms, as well as anti-patterns. And so it starts again with that template. And then, for example, all the interviews follow 2-block mandatory order pattern. There's always an interview order code block that controls the logic. They use name fields and address field methods instead of writing them raw. So rather than completely reinventing the wheel, you can take a lot of those patterns, internalize them, and then suddenly the LLM becomes genuinely useful. So without that context, you might get hallucinated YAML files that don't run at all. Whereas I was able to get some code that, of course, still needed some iteration. And thanks to the ODR clinic in which I was able to be a teacher's assistant for and getting the students to also provide feedback. But that time to get from kind of 0 to 1 was significantly compressed. And even with testing, we have a playground suite that we can use to run through these interviews. And sometimes what it may look like is you make a change to your code, you run it, you get to a screen, and then you may run into an error. Then you have to fix the error and kind of resume. So I was able to stand up kind of a local version of that same server on my computer so that when these agents were fixing the code, and if they ran into an error, it would immediately see said error, fix it, and then log it in kind of my list of known errors so that hopefully we wouldn't run into kind of that same issue again. And so, KP, if you could just move on to the next slide. In conclusion, the Lit Lab has spent a decade building open source infrastructure on top of Docassemble, the assembly line framework, and everything like that. And so that foundation made possible what I just described. That output really was only useful because of those repos as context. And so what I think this makes possible is that there aren't a million or 2 million forms in the United States. I think that with this type of system, and for the students who are coming in the Lit Lab in the future, you can build on top of this. I think I'm not sure if anybody had mentioned it so far, but from where we began in August of this year, September in the fall through now, these large language models improved greatly. I don't think that they would have been able to help in the way that they did without kind of those jumps in capabilities. And I think what that goes to show is that not only in the Lit Lab and the work that we're doing, but the law in general, very structured, text-based. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity to build systems around some of these workflows. I know a lot of people's experience with large language models, maybe in ChatGPT or Claude. It's a text-based kind of chatbot experience, but I think that this is just a reminder that the underlying technology is very powerful. Wheels don't necessarily need to be reinvented, and perhaps most importantly, a lot of important work can be done. I mean, you can imagine the frustration of somebody going to the court for the first time to fill out this form. They might not even have the necessary documents to fill it out. They might not know that this is going to take a few hours of their time. And the court staff have a lot of different services to provide and people to help, and it may not always scale well. And so I just want to shout out the directors of the Legal Innovation Technology Clinic, as well as the program as a whole, for the important work that's kind of done here. And I look forward to continuing to build some of these forms into next year. So thank you again. And hopefully I'll see you all at LitCon next year as well.
You're always asking me to have nice pictures for the lab, show us stuff you're doing or whatnot. So I'm standing up here now in suspenders with cat ears, Mike, if you want to take a picture. We're now going to have a little break. I encourage people to go clear out that morning food before it goes, before it just is taken away. The apple turnover is quite nice. We're going to take about 10 minutes, and then we'll set back up for our next panel. And we're on time. I love that.